Halloween night, the moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced like specters. It was a night when costumed children roamed the streets in search of candy and spooky delights. But I, a young single woman named Sarah, had chosen to stay home and offer treats to the neighborhood's trick-or-treaters. My small, cozy house was adorned with pumpkins, cobwebs, and a ghostly light that spilled from my porch. As the evening descended, the doorbell chimed incessantly, and I greeted each child with a smile, handing out sweets with warm wishes. The night was as usual, filled with giggles, cheerful laughter, and the delightful squeals of children in their assorted costumes. The air was thick with the scent of candy, and I reveled in being a part of their Halloween memories. As the night deepened, I noticed a tall, imposing figure approaching. A sense of foreboding pricked at my skin when I saw him. He was dressed in all black, and his mask was not the whimsical kind that other children wore. It was menacing, an ominous featureless face that sent shivers down my spine. He reached the porch, his presence casting a cold shadow. Without a word, he extended a bag toward me. I raised an eyebrow, confusion clouding my thoughts. "A bit old for trick-or-treating, aren't we?" I said, trying to inject a note of levity into the situation. But my voice quivered ever so slightly. The man's silence was deafening, and his masked face bore no expression. He seemed unaffected by my comment, maintaining an eerie stillness. After an uncomfortable pause, I decided not to give him any candy, feeling uneasy about the stranger before me. He turned and left, disappearing into the night. I thought the strange encounter was over, but it was only the beginning of a nightmarish ordeal that would forever change my life. Minutes after the man in black departed, the lights in my house flickered and then went out, plunging me into a suffocating darkness. Panic washed over me as I fumbled for my phone, a beacon of hope in the obsidian abyss. That's when the first message arrived, the eerie glow of my phone illuminating the room in an eerie, spectral glow. The message was simple yet sent chills racing down my spine. It read, "You shouldn't have judged me." I gasped, struggling to contain my growing terror. Who was this person, and how had they obtained my number? The realization that the man in black and the sender of these messages were one and the same hit me like a ton of bricks. I had unwittingly angered him, and he now had my full attention. The messages kept coming, each one more threatening and unhinged than the last. The man's words painted a vivid picture of a psychopath, an abuser who had harbored a deep-seated grudge against me, someone I had never met before. He recounted perceived slights and rejections, painting himself as the victim of my judgment. He demanded an apology, threatening dire consequences if I didn't comply. I trembled in fear, my heart racing in my chest as I navigated through the storm of threats and insanity. The man in black was not just unhinged, he was utterly deranged. I quickly dialed 911, seeking help from the authorities, but no sooner had I made the call than my phone went dead. Panic enveloped me as I realized the extent of my predicament. My house was plunged into complete darkness, the oppressive silence broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. The moment I realized that the front door was unlocked, dread tightened its grip around my heart. In my panic, I ran to the door and saw it slightly ajar, as if taunting me with the threat that had entered my home. With trembling hands, I locked the door. I knew that I couldn't stay in the living room, where the stranger's malevolent presence seemed to linger in the darkness. Clutching a knife from the kitchen, I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. As I sat on the edge of my bed, the room seemed to close in on me. It was then that another message appeared on my phone: "You really like green." The words sent a chill down my spine. How did this stranger know about my favorite color? I couldn't fathom how this madman had access to such intimate details of my life. The only realization that came was that most of my clothes were green. And then my stomach lurched. Slowly, I approached my wardrobe. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat like a warning drum. Suddenly, the masked man erupted from the wardrobe, his presence a looming nightmare. Before I could think, my instincts kicked in, and I swung the knife, narrowly cutting his arm. He cried out in pain, and I seized the opportunity to bolt from the room. I sprinted through the pitch-black house, the man's menacing pursuit echoing through the corridors. I couldn't see anything, but terror gave me uncanny clarity, guiding me to the front door. I flung it open and raced into the cool night, my breath coming in desperate gasps. I sought refuge at my neighbor's house, their kindness and safety a warm embrace in the cold, dark night. They called the police, who arrived quickly and caught the man not far from my house. But as the night unfolded, it revealed a much more sinister truth. 2 single women, including my neighbor, had been found brutally murdered in their homes. The maniac who had terrorized me was leaving death and despair in his wake. The horror of that Halloween night haunted me for the rest of my days. It was a night when terror wore a mask, a night when the darkness revealed the depths of human evil. But my thoughts were forever plagued by the knowledge that not all of us were so fortunate. 2 lives had been extinguished that night, and their blood stained the memories of those who had known them. It was a grim reminder that evil could lurk in the shadows, ready to pounce when we least expected it.
Halloween night had arrived, enveloping our small town in a chilly, autumn embrace. My group of friends, Mark, Jenna, Brian, and I, had always been drawn to the thrill of mischief on this night of spooks and specters. It was our tradition to concoct the most elaborate tricks, pushing the boundaries of harmless pranks. But this year, our quest for thrills would lead us down a dark and twisted path. In our town, there was an enigmatic reclusive woman rumored to be a witch. Local tales painted her as a master of the dark arts, and her very presence was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. The legend of her eerie powers only grew stronger with each passing year. So, we decided to make her the target of our Halloween prank. Our prank was straightforward: we'd adorn her home with eggs splattered across the windows and drape her yard with toilet paper, turning it into an eerie spectacle. With the egg cartons and rolls of toilet paper, we set out on our adventure. As we ventured into the darkened woods, the once amusing prospect of pranking the mysterious woman started to seem like a reckless decision. The atmosphere was tense, our grins replaced by hesitant glances, and the thrill of the prank turned into a heavy burden. The witch's cottage, nestled at the edge of the woods, came into view. It was a decrepit structure, enshrouded in ivy and cobwebs, with windows that seemed to peer into the darkest corners of our souls. With hesitant giggles, we began our mischievous endeavor. Eggs splattered across her windows, and toilet paper littered her yard, turning it into a ghoulish sight. Our laughter echoed through the night, but it held a tinge of unease. As we made our hasty retreat, an unexplainable change washed over us. The thrill of the prank, once so exciting, transformed into an ominous feeling of dread. The air seemed to grow colder, and a heavy sense of foreboding settled over us. In the days that followed our ill-fated prank, the atmosphere among our group grew increasingly oppressive. Jenna was the first to exhibit signs of the curse's influence. She spoke of constant nightmares involving the enigmatic woman and claimed to have seen a ghostly figure lurking in the shadows. Jenna's paranoia escalated, forcing her into seclusion. She rarely left her room, her mental state spiraling into the abyss. A few days later, tragedy struck. Jenna was found lifeless in her room, her wrists severed. We were horrified, but fear had wedged itself firmly within our hearts. Mark was next to bear the brunt of the curse's malevolence. He reported eerily similar nightmares, claimed that he was being watched, and spoke of the inexorable presence of a dark figure in the corners of his room. Not long after, Mark died in a car accident. The weight of guilt bore down on Brian and me, and we felt increasingly compelled to rectify our thoughtless prank. The nights grew restless, filled with dread and regret. With a shared determination, Brian and I decided to confront the source of our curse. The witch's eerie cottage beckoned to us from the edge of the woods, and we knew we couldn't escape our fate. We embarked on a journey, navigating the foreboding forest once more, our footsteps heavy with trepidation. As we neared the witch's cottage, the woods seemed to close in around us. Trees gnarled and twisted, their branches forming grotesque figures in the moonlight. It was as though the forest itself sought to deter us from our mission. The cottage emerged, a sinister presence within the forest's heart. The air turned colder, and shadows deepened as we approached the woman's eerie abode. With trembling resolve, we stepped forward, the creaking door opening with a haunting familiarity. We ventured into the dimly lit cottage, its atmosphere heavy with ancient secrets and enigmatic knowledge. There, in the center of the room, stood the reclusive woman. My heart was pounding as I looked at her. In her hand, she clutched a grotesque voodoo doll. With an eerie and knowing smile, she twisted the doll's leg, and to my horror, Brian's screams of agony pierced the air. Brian's leg snapped as if it were a twig, and he cried out in excruciating pain. The woman continued her malevolent act, breaking his fingers one by one, each sickening crack sending chills down my spine. I could barely stand to witness my friend's suffering, but I was paralyzed by fear and the realization that our actions had brought us to this nightmarish moment. Brian's agonized cries filled the room, and I could bear it no longer. I turned and fled from the cottage, my footsteps echoing in the eerie stillness of the forest. Panic consumed me as I realized there was no escaping the consequences of our thoughtless prank. I ran through the woods, desperate to put distance between myself and the witch's curse. Now, as I write this, I am filled with dread, awaiting my own inevitable fate. I know that I cannot escape the curse that binds me to the consequences of our reckless actions. In the end, Halloween night had transformed from a tradition of mischief and fun into a nightmarish descent into darkness, and I can only hope that others will learn from the terrible price we paid for our heedless prank. Halloween night, a night that blurs the boundaries between the living and the dead, had arrived. For some, it's a time for costumes, candy, and playful frights. For my group of college friends, it was an opportunity to take our quest for adventure to the next level. We decided to spend the night in a notorious, abandoned mansion that had been the source of chilling tales in our small town. This crumbling edifice had long been associated with ghost stories and whispers of restless spirits. Its dark history and eerie ambience added to the fear that cloaked the place. We were determined to uncover the truth and, in doing so, show our town that the legends were nothing more than urban myths. Standing before the desolate mansion, its ghostly silhouette against the moonlit sky sent a shiver down my spine. With flashlights in hand and makeshift masks covering our faces, my friends, Tony, Lily, Mike, Emily, and I were ready to face the night. With each step, we ventured further into the enigmatic house, revealing old family portraits and forgotten mementos that spoke of lives long past. As the night progressed, we began to hear peculiar sounds. Footsteps echoed in the hallways, whispers seemed to linger at the edge of our perception, and odd drafts of cold air brushed against our skin. We dismissed these eerie occurrences, attributing them to our overactive imaginations and the eerie setting. The clock in the hall eventually struck midnight, and Tony pulled out a Ouija board. It was the perfect time to uncover the house's secrets, he proclaimed. Hesitation lingered in the room, but curiosity prevailed, and we gathered around the board. With trembling fingers, we placed our hands on the planchette. The world outside faded away and the room was filled with an oppressive silence as Tony asked, "Is there anyone with us?" As we exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly the planchette began to move, writing "yes" on the board. But Lily, always the skeptic, disregarded the Ouija board's unwritten rules and removed her hand from the planchette without saying goodbye. A palpable darkness descended on the room, and the once eerie atmosphere turned malevolent. An unnatural coldness filled the room, and a malevolent presence swept through like a sinister wind. The candles flickered and extinguished. From the shadows came a guttural whisper. As we sat in that dimly lit room, fear clawed at our hearts. Despite our growing unease, Lily's impulsive act of removing her hand from the planchette had broken the connection with the otherworldly entity. As the evening progressed, we began to hear footsteps from upstairs. We exchanged wide-eyed glances, a collective realization that we were not alone in the house. Panic stirred in our hearts, and the bravado that had fueled our adventure drained away. The majority of our group, gripped by terror, expressed their fervent desire to leave the house immediately. The once enticing prospect of spending a night in a haunted house had turned into a living nightmare. But for Lily, it was an opportunity to prove that there was a rational explanation for the eerie events. She declared her intention to investigate the source of the sounds, her voice trembling with a false sense of bravery. With trepidation, she made her way upstairs, and the weight of her footsteps faded into the silence. We waited below, our nerves stretched to the limit. Moments passed into minutes, and as each second ticked by, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to thicken. Anxiety gnawed at our souls as we anxiously looked at the staircase, awaiting Lily's return. But she didn't show up. We decided to look for Lily and climbed the creaking stairs. As we reached the upper floor, our flashlights scanned the gloomy corridor, revealing a series of decaying, cobweb-covered rooms. Our hearts pounded as we ventured deeper into the house. While searching one of the rooms, we heard a soft cry coming from the closet. We opened it to find Lily huddled in the corner, her eyes filled with terror. Emily approached Lily, speaking soothingly and asking her what had happened. Her response was a trembling whisper, a fragile string of words that sent shivers down our spines. "There is someone in the room." Suddenly, the door leading into the room slammed shut with a resounding thud. Objects began to shift and move of their own accord, the room's dark energy intensifying with each passing second. In a surge of fear-fueled desperation, Mike lunged toward the door, attempting to open it. His efforts proved futile, as if some malevolent force was determined to keep us trapped. It was then that we understood. We had awakened a wrathful presence. With a last-ditch effort, Mike broke down the door. I took Lily in my arms and we ran to the front door. The walls seemed to vibrate as we ran, objects around us moving as if in a malevolent attempt to block our path. But we were determined to escape its clutches, the collective terror in our hearts urging us onward. We burst out into the cold, moonlit night, gasping for breath and seeking solace in the open air. The terror that had enveloped us within those walls began to dissipate as we left the mansion behind. But our hearts still pounded with the lingering dread of what we had unleashed. We had walked on the precipice of the supernatural, and the experience had left its indelible mark on us. Lily's parents started taking her to a psychologist and her condition improved, but she never said what she saw that night.